My name is Vivian Ashford. I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my sister destroyed my relationship with my parents using one lie. She told them I dropped out of medical school. She told them I was hiding things. She told them I had thrown my future away. And my parents believed every word. They blocked my number. They stopped answering my emails. They missed my graduation. They missed my wedding. For 5 years, I lived like I no longer existed to them. Then one night, my sister was rushed into my trauma bay bleeding to death. The hospital paged the chief trauma surgeon. Me. And when my mother looked up and saw my name stitched across my white coat, she grabbed my father's arm so hard it left bruises. That was the moment the truth finally came crashing down. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you need to go back to the last time my father ever looked proud of me. Bramwell, Massachusetts. Fall of 2019. Our kitchen table. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Ashford family. My sister Camille was the favorite. Everyone knew it. Camille was beautiful, loud, charming, funny. She could walk into any room and own it within minutes. Parents loved her. Teachers loved her. Neighbors loved her. And my parents built their entire world around her. Dad worked at a manufacturing plant. Mom did bookkeeping. They cared deeply about appearances. And Camille always looked perfect. I was the quiet daughter, the one with books in her lap, the one who sat in corners at family parties reading biology textbooks while Camille made everyone laugh. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I was just invisible. There's a difference between being ignored sometimes and growing up feeling like nobody ever truly sees you. That was my childhood. In 8th grade, I made it to the state science fair. Only one student from our school qualified. Me. That same weekend, Camille had a community theater performance. Guess where my parents went? When I came home with 2nd place, Dad barely looked up from the television. "That's nice, Vivian," he said. He never even asked what my project was about. A working water filtration model, in case anyone was wondering, which nobody was. After a while, I stopped expecting him to ask. So I focused on grades, on AP classes, on scholarships. I told myself that one day I'd accomplish something so big they'd finally have to notice me. And for one small moment they did. The day I got accepted into Ashcombe University School of Medicine changed everything. Dad opened the letter at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. "Ashcombe," he said slowly. "That's a real medical school." Then came 5 words I'd waited my entire life to hear. "Maybe you'll make something of yourself." It wasn't warm. It wasn't loving. But for my father it felt enormous. Mom spent the entire evening calling relatives. "Vivian got into medical school," she kept saying. I'd never heard pride in her voice when she talked about me before. At dinner I glanced at Camille. She smiled. But her eyes didn't. At the time I ignored it. Now I know that was the exact moment she realized the spotlight was moving away from her. And Camille could never survive that. After I moved away for school, she started calling constantly. She asked about my professors, my classes, my roommates, my schedule. She remembered every detail. I thought she finally cared about me. I thought maybe becoming a medical student had finally made me worthy of being her sister. I was wrong. I was feeding her information. Every weakness, every fear, every vulnerable moment. And she stored all of it away, like a squirrel burying acorns for a very specific, very sabotage-shaped winter. 3rd year of medical school was when my life cracked open. My best friend Grace Bennett was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Grace grew up in foster care. She had nobody. No parents, no siblings, no safety net. Just me. She had carried me through 1st year when I nearly collapsed from stress. When my parents ignored my calls because Camille was having a rough week, Grace was the person who sat beside me on the floor and told me to keep going. So when she got sick, I couldn't walk away. I went to the dean. I explained everything. The school approved a formal leave of absence. 1 semester. Everything documented. Everything legal. I planned to return in January. I moved into Grace's apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy. I held her hand at 3 in the morning when the pain became unbearable. One night, exhausted and emotional, I made the mistake of calling Camille. I told her everything. Grace's diagnosis, the leave of absence, the plan to return. Camille sounded supportive. "Oh my God, Vivian," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Don't worry, I won't tell Mom and Dad. They'll just panic." 3 days later, my entire life exploded. Dad called me at 11 p.m. I was sitting beside Grace's hospital bed when my phone rang. "Your sister told us everything," he said coldly. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "The dropping out. The lies. The boyfriend." I stood so fast my chair slammed into the wall. "Dad, that's not true. Camille showed us proof." "What proof?" "She said you'd deny it." My mother got on the phone crying. "How could you hide this from us, Vivian?" "I didn't hide anything. I filed a leave of absence. Can send paperwork. I can give you the dean's number." Dad's voice hardened. "Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth." Then he hung up. For minutes. That's how long it took my family to erase me. 20 minutes later, Camille texted me. "I'm sorry, Vivian. I had to tell them." She even added a broken heart emoji, as if punctuation could soften a demolition. I stared at that message until my vision blurred. Then Grace's monitor beeped, dragging me back into reality. My friend was dying. And somehow my sister had turned me into the villain. I tried to fix it. God, I tried. Called 16 times in 5 days. My father blocked my number. Then my mother blocked me too. I sent emails. I attached my leave paperwork. I included my dean's phone number. No response. I mailed a handwritten letter. 5 days later it came back unopened. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I called my Aunt Josephine. She was the only person in my family who ever treated me fairly. Josephine tried talking to Dad. He hung up on her. That was when I finally understood something. This wasn't just about Camille's lie. This was about years of conditioning. My parents always believed Camille first. Always. They didn't investigate because deep down they were already prepared to think the worst of me. Camille simply handed them permission. A quick, honest aside here. Psychologists sometimes call this confirmation bias in family systems. Once a parent has decided which child is trustworthy and which isn't, new evidence gets filtered through that decision instead of the other way around. It's not that the believed sibling is more convincing. It's that the outcome was already decided long before the accusation. On the 6th day I stopped calling. Not because I stopped caring. Because I realized nobody was listening. Grace died in December. Quietly. Peacefully. I was holding her hand when the monitor flattened. No family surrounded her. No loved ones filled the room. Just me. I arranged her funeral myself. 6 people came. I stood in front of nearly empty pews reading a eulogy while trying not to collapse. That night, alone in her apartment, I found a sticky note tucked into her anatomy textbook. Her handwriting shook across the page. "Finish what you started, Vivian. Become the doctor I know you are." I cried harder that night than I had in months. Then I reopened my laptop. And I re-enrolled. I went back to medical school with no family, no emotional support, no safety net. I took extra loans, worked extra hours, lived on cafeteria leftovers, and pushed myself harder than I thought possible. Medical school doesn't pause because your heart is broken. Patients still need care. Exams still happen. Rotations still start at dawn. So I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. Became relentless. I graduated on time. Nobody from Bramwell came. Then I matched into a surgical residency at Sterling Cross Medical Center in Massachusetts. A massive trauma hospital, one of the busiest in the state. That's where I met Dr. Eleanor Whitfield. Everyone called her Nora. She became my mentor. The closest thing I had to a mother. She was sharp, demanding, terrifying, and fiercely protective of her residents. One night after a brutal surgery, she found me crying quietly in a supply closet. Instead of asking questions, she handed me tissues and said, You're one of the strongest residents I've ever trained. Stop apologizing for surviving. I never forgot that. During my 3rd year of residency, I met Benjamin Hale, a civil rights attorney. Kind eyes, dry humor, the safest person I'd ever known. When I finally told him everything about my family, he didn't interrupt, didn't pity me, didn't try to fix me. He just listened. Then he said 4 words. You deserved better, Vivian. I almost cried hearing that, because nobody in my family had ever said it. We got married 2 years later. Small backyard wedding. 34 guests. Warm lights. October air. I mailed invitations to my parents. The envelope came back unopened. Again. Ben's father walked me down the aisle instead. Aunt Josephine cried enough for all 3 of my missing family members. She'd apparently been saving up tears for the occasion the way some people save up vacation days. After the ceremony, Nora handed me a sealed envelope. Award nomination, she said. You'll understand later. I tucked it away and moved on with my life. 5 years passed. I became chief of trauma surgery at Sterling Cross. I built a home, a marriage, a life that belonged entirely to me. But even when you heal, some wounds leave ghosts. Every Thanksgiving I still noticed the empty seats. Every Christmas I still wondered if my parents ever thought about me. Aunt Josephine stayed in contact. She gave me small updates. Camille got divorced. Mom and Dad were healthy. Nobody ever reached out. Then 1 week before everything changed, Josephine called sounding nervous. Vivian, she said carefully, there's something you need to know about Camille. Before she could continue, my pager went off. Trauma activation. I told her I'd call back. I never got the chance. Because at that exact moment, Camille was driving down Route 12 toward a red light she would never stop for. The pager woke me at 3:07 a.m. Level 1 trauma. Female. Mid-30s. Severe abdominal injuries. I dressed fast, drove through freezing rain, ran through surgical possibilities in my head. I entered the trauma bay and grabbed the intake tablet. Then I saw the patient name. Camille Ashford. My body went completely still. For 2 seconds I couldn't breathe. Then training took over. Prep or 2, I ordered. The ambulance arrived seconds later. Camille looked terrible. Blood soaked through her shirt. Her skin was pale. Her breathing shallow. And behind the stretcher came my parents. Panicked, terrified, older. My father grabbed a nurse. Where's the surgeon? Please help my daughter. The nurse glanced toward me. Her eyes widened slightly when she read my badge. I gave a tiny shake of my head. Not yet. My parents were guided into the waiting room while I scrubbed in. Alone in the scrub room, I stared at my reflection. 5 years of silence. And now the woman who caused all of it was bleeding out on my table. Part of me wanted to walk away, let another surgeon handle it. But Camille was dying. And the best trauma surgeon in that hospital was me. So I walked into the operating room. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That's how long I fought to save her. Ruptured spleen. Severe liver damage. Internal bleeding. My hands never shook. Not once. Because inside the OR, she wasn't my sister. She was my patient. And patients don't deserve revenge. They deserve care. At 6:48 a.m., I placed the final stitch. Camille stabilized. Alive. Dr. Patel looked at me quietly. You want me to speak to the family? I removed my gloves. No. This one's mine. I walked into the waiting room wearing surgical scrubs and my hospital badge. Dr. Vivian Ashford, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Dad stood immediately. How is my daughter? Then he looked at my badge and froze. Mom followed his gaze, her face drained of color. 5 full seconds passed in silence. Then I spoke calmly. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, your daughter survived surgery. She's stable in the ICU. Not Mom. Not Dad. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. That hurt them. Could see it. Mom started crying instantly. Oh my God. Vivian. She stepped toward me. I stepped back just half a step, but it felt enormous. Dad looked completely shattered. You're a doctor. I'm the chief of trauma surgery. But Camille said. What exactly did Camille say? His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Mom whispered. We thought you dropped out. She told you I dropped out. She told you I disappeared. She told you I abandoned everyone. Tears streamed down Mom's face. She said you stopped calling. I called 16 times in 5 days. Dad stared at the floor. I emailed paperwork. I mailed letters. You sent one back unopened. The silence after that felt endless. Behind the glass partition, nurses watched quietly. Everyone understood something huge was happening. Dad finally spoke. This isn't the place for this. I looked him directly in the eyes. I just spent nearly 4 hours saving Camille's life. I think we're already past appropriate timing. He had no response. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Then one of my nurses approached. The board wanted me to tell you, congratulations. Physician of the Year committee finalized their selection. Mom stared at me. Physician of the Year. It's just a hospital recognition. But the damage was done. My parents finally saw the truth standing directly in front of them. Not a failure. Not a liar. Surgeon. Leader. Someone they abandoned. I turned to leave. Then I heard my mother whisper behind me. Arthur, what have we done? Hours later, Camille woke up. I entered her ICU room for a routine check. She looked confused until she read my badge. Then terror spread across her face. You're a doctor, she whispered. I'm your surgeon. She stared at me, trying to process everything. Then came the calculation, that familiar look. She was already searching for a new angle. I can explain, she whispered. You need to explain it to them, I said, nodding toward the hallway where our parents stood. Then I walked out. What happened next spread through the ICU within an hour. Camille cried, played the victim, claimed she was trying to protect everyone. But Dad finally started asking questions. Real questions. And once the truth started cracking open, everything collapsed fast. Then Aunt Josephine arrived. Prepared. She carried screenshots, emails, proof, every document I had sent over the years. She showed my parents the leave paperwork, my residency graduation photo, my old emails begging them to listen. Then she read one of Camille's text messages aloud. Don't tell Mom and Dad about Vivian's residency. They're finally at peace. The room went silent. Mom sat there reading my emails one after another. At one point, she covered her mouth and started shaking. Dad turned toward the window. Josephine later told me it was the first time she'd ever seen him cry. Not at funerals, not during financial disasters, never. But he cried that day because the truth finally cornered him. That afternoon, I returned to Camille's room. My parents stood when I entered. Mom looked completely broken. Vivian, I'm so sorry. I held up a hand. I believe you're sorry. But sorry is a beginning, not an ending. Dad swallowed hard. We want to fix this. You need to understand something first, I said quietly. I'm not the same girl you abandoned 5 years ago. I built a life without you. If you want to be part of it now, it happens on my terms. Dad nodded slowly. Not arguing, not defending himself, just listening. That alone felt unreal. I looked at Camille. When you recover, we're going to have a real conversation. 2 weeks later we met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. Ben sat nearby reading legal documents. Camille looked exhausted, smaller somehow. For the first time in her life, she looked unsure of herself. I didn't waste time. Why? She stared into her coffee, then finally answered. Because you were becoming everything I wasn't. I sat quietly. That's the first honest thing you've said in years. She started crying. Real tears. I'm sorry. I know. But sorry doesn't give me back my wedding. It doesn't give me back 5 years. Then she admitted something worse. She had contacted my medical school anonymously, trying to get my leave revoked, trying to destroy my future permanently. I stared at her in disbelief. Your dean didn't believe me, she whispered. Because the truth protected me, I said. I laid out my conditions. She would tell every family member the truth. Every lie, every rumor, everything. And she would do it in writing. She agreed. Then I met my parents separately, at the same kitchen table where everything once began. I told them if they wanted a relationship with me, they needed therapy. Real therapy. Dad resisted immediately. We don't do that. That's exactly why this happened. Mom squeezed his arm. Finally, he agreed. A brief educational note here. Family therapists often stress that an apology without a change in behavior is really just a request for the relationship to reset without anything being fixed. Real repair usually needs 3 things: acknowledgement, accountability, and consistent new behavior over time. Vivian was, without knowing the textbook term for it, asking her parents for exactly that. Months passed slowly, painfully, but honestly. Mom wrote me letters. Real letters. Not excuses. Accountability. She admitted she spent years choosing comfort over fairness. Dad struggled more. Pride had ruled him for decades. But little by little he started changing. Camille sent the family email. 52 relatives received the truth. Some replied with anger. Some with disappointment. Some never responded at all. The trust Camille built over 35 years disappeared almost overnight. Nobody screamed at her. Nobody disowned her. They simply stopped believing her. And for Camille that was devastating. Then came the Physician of the Year Gala. 220 people filled the ballroom. Doctors, hospital leaders, board members. I walked onto the stage while the room applauded. And near the back sat my parents. Together watching me. Dad looked emotional. Mom already crying. I stood at the podium and kept my speech simple. 5 years ago, I thought losing my family would destroy me. Instead, it forced me to build a life strong enough to survive without their approval. I looked toward Ben, toward Nora, toward Aunt Josephine, then finally toward my parents. Sometimes the people who choose you become your real family. And sometimes the people who lost you find their way back later than they should. Mom covered her mouth. Dad stood during the applause. After the gala, he approached Ben near the coat check. I should have walked her down the aisle, Dad said quietly. Ben nodded. Yes, you should have. Dad's eyes filled instantly. But Ben still shook his hand. That mattered. Healing didn't happen overnight. It still hasn't. Some wounds never fully disappear, but they stop bleeding eventually. Now my parents come over on Sunday mornings sometimes. Awkward at first. Careful. Gentle. Like everyone's learning a new language. And frankly, Dad's accent in that language still needs work. One snowy morning, they arrived while Ben and I were making breakfast. Dad stood in my kitchen looking uncertain. Then he asked quietly, "Can I help with anything?" That question nearly broke me. My father had never asked how to help before. Not once in my entire childhood. I handed him plates. You can set the table. He counted carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he paused. Looked at me. 4. 4, I said. He nodded slowly and set the last plate down gently, like something precious. Mom hugged me by the stove. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just quietly. Holding on. Outside snow fell softly. Ben poured coffee. Our dog Biscuit waited hopefully for crumbs under the table, a strategy that has never once failed him. And for the first time in years, my family sat together in my house. Not perfect, not healed completely, but real. That matters more. I didn't get revenge on my sister. I didn't need revenge. I became someone strong enough not to need it. And somehow, that hurt her more than revenge ever could. The truth eventually found all of us. Not through screaming. Not through punishment. But through reality. Through the life I built while they weren't watching. My name is Dr. Vivian Ashford. I'm 32 years old. And after years of being treated like I didn't belong anywhere, I'm finally learning how to let myself belong again. One plate. One conversation. One Sunday morning at a time. 4 plates. It's a start. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place?